so much for having me. It's great to see you in person, and also hello to everyone online wherever you are. I'm not sure where I'm looking. I want to start by introducing myself. You heard a little bit about me. My name is Karen. I like to say I'm nice Karen. Since there are so many Karens who have a bad reputation, I am the exception. And you know, that's lesson number one, is don't be afraid of really finding ways to make yourself memorable and unique and proud of who you are. So, you know, because we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the ways that I live that value is in my dress, in how I show up, in just being really proud of my background. Not needing to fit in is a really important part of this work. Being confident enough to own who you are. So for those of you who are wondering, do I need to fit in to be successful? I would say no. What's really important is your diversity and how you leverage that in your own identity to present yourself as different in the world. So today's session, we're looking at 3 objectives. The first one is introducing you to my signature framework around conscious equality. The second objective is to help you unpack key concepts around DEIB, which is part of the online training that you've already done on this topic, and then to offer you with some industry insights, because I've been doing this work for over 25 years, and as you heard, I've done it with governments, with NGOs, with educational institutions, and across the world. And so there are some golden threads that I feel have really come through over and over again in all the different contexts and sectors that I've worked in, and I like to bring those forward for your consideration as you bring this into your work as a mindset. So what we're looking at right now, this framework is my signature framework. It's called the Conscious Equality Framework. It had 4 parts, now it has 6, because I'm being more inclusive as I learn more, and I want to make sure that we cover decolonization and indigenization as part of my work too. And so what we're looking at when we talk about unpacking the key concepts around DEI, this is the framework that we're going to cover. So we have 6 different concepts here that we're going to talk about, and I really want to focus in on not the theory of it, but the practice of it. What does it look like to do this work for an organization? Because I've done that both as a consultant and as somebody who owns this portfolio within organizations. So the first topic is diversity. What is diversity? You know, when we talk about what is diversity, people say so many different things. But one of the lessons that I want to share with you is that diversity is not just about gender or about your race. It's about all of the different ways in which we are unique as human beings. And so there's a challenge in that, because every single one of us has an identity that has many intersections. And intersectionality is a big part of the conversation about diversity. And at the same time, we can't factor in, as an organization, everybody's differences. So how do we move people together towards change while recognizing that we're all diverse in our experiences and that we all have different ways of thinking and doing, right? So number one, the first thing to note is that diversity is not just about our attributes, our external attributes. There's external attributes, there's internal attributes, there's worldviews and experiences. There's many layers to this, and I teach this in my own 6-month program, but diversity has many layers to it when you're looking at creating change. And one of the popular things that we talk about when we look at diversity is the issue of representation. How many people have heard about, we're doing DEIB work, and heard that it means increasing representation of underrepresented groups? Have you heard that concept before? Well, that's an important piece. And what, I created this entire framework based on what I was hearing, but also realizing that there are gaps in the ways organizations are doing this work. So the first thing is, yes, representation is important. So if we take most of the boards around the world, but let's take Canada, most of the boards around Canada and in Fortune 500 companies, most of them are oriented towards men. So you have way more men on those boards, and a lot of them are white men. You have very few women, and you have even fewer people of color at the level of the board. And so when we talk about representation, first of all, we need to know the numbers. Is there representation? Is there diversity, whether it's gender-based, race-based, or any other way? Now, the Government of Canada has a call to action called 50-30. Have you heard of 50-30? So 50-30 is something you want to look up. 50-30 is a call from the Government of Canada to all organizations to increase their gender balance efforts and to increase their diversity efforts at the leadership level. So they're recognizing that in order for us to create successful organizations that are meaningfully inclusive and that have a real impact on organizations, we want to have at least 50% of women and at least 30% of diversity. Now, there's a theory called the tipping point theory, which says that influence and change requires minimum 30%. So we don't want just one woman. We need to create enough diversity that you've got 30% of diversity in that particular domain so that you can actually be heard and you can actually make a difference. So diversity isn't about one person. We have to have a minimum amount of people in order for their voice to be heard and in order for their ideas to make a difference. The second thing that we heard is this concept of parity. So parity is often known as gender balance or balance, meaning 50-50. And so is the goal of representation 50-50 or is the goal of representation something else? And I would argue that parity is important, but what I learned at the United Nations, for example, was that the person that was affecting and getting in the way of our agenda to do gender equality work was actually a woman in power. So it's not just about, am I a female and am I sitting at a leadership level? It's also about, am I at a leadership level and do I understand and am I committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I would rather work with a room full of male leaders who understand this work and are committed to it than a room full of women leaders who are against it. And so it's not just about, come on, join us. It's not just about numbers, right? It's also about the quality, my commitments. So parity is important, but it's not the only thing. And then I want to talk about pathways to leadership as part of diversity work. So we say that the point of diversity is, and there's tons of research to back this up, that it allows us to make better decisions and solve problems in new ways. Why do we think that is? So diversity, it's not just about me being diverse, it's recognizing that because I'm diverse, I have a different worldview, a different way of looking at things, a different way of solving problems, and the more differences we have in ways of thinking and doing, the more likely we are to create innovation, right? And so it's super important. I'll give you a great example because I did a lot of work for gender equality in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics for a couple of years. And a great example of diversity and how lack of diversity is impacting the products that organizations create or companies create is the seatbelt. So the seatbelt was designed initially by men for men, which means that when you're looking at what kind of body are we trying to protect in a collision, it's often a male body in terms of height, length, all of that. How much muscle, when we're using algorithms and AI to figure out, how strong does the hold have to be? What is the standard average of the body that you put in there? It's often a male body. And so what we've seen, research has shown from a STEM perspective that when they started to account for the fact that more women who are pregnant die in accidents because the seatbelt wasn't designed to keep their body in place because they have a different shape and size of body, now we take that experience and that information and we redesign the seatbelt to be a 3-point harness so that it holds bodies in place that are different from male bodies. The same thing applies to medication. When we did testing of medication, the testing of medication was often done on men. And so what we've learned over time is that the bodies of women actually metabolize medication differently, so they require different doses. The body reacts differently than the male body because of the hormones in it. And we've even done research that shows that sometimes whether you're Caucasian or whether you're a black person impacts whether a drug can be used to affect you in another way. It's critical to making products and services that truly meet the needs of diverse groups. And when we don't, if I just give you that example of this car seat, there's a disproportionate negative impact on a particular population because we didn't take their diverse experience and needs into account, right? So this is why it's so important, and people often say, oh, this is such a fundamental conversation, it's just conceptual. Well, to me, it's not conceptual. It is 100% central to any business doing anything they're doing well. I think it was HST. So, if we're in Ontario, we use HST on our products, right? At some point, the tax was divided between federal and provincial, and then for administrative reasons, they merged the taxes into one tax. So you only pay once, and the businesses only have to, submit their claims once, et cetera, et cetera. But in the process, there were products that women need, so products for the babies, products for menstruating, that were now being charged HST, and it created a problem for women who didn't have access to funds. So if I'm living in poverty, and now you've added an extra expense that I have to pay on every product that I need for me, I now have to choose between getting the menstrual product or using that money to pay for food for my kid. So when government policymakers sit at a certain level, they don't think like that. They just think about efficiency. How do I reduce the amount of time it takes to file HST or PST or whatever it is? They don't think about what are the different groups and what are their different needs, and if we add this, who is most vulnerable, and how are we creating a new problem by doing this? And so, another message for you here, and this is from my international development work, is efficiency is not always equal to success. Sometimes in your fight for efficiency, you actually hurt people along the way, in which case you failed. So the last piece around diversity is this piece around pathways to leadership. And this is really important for organizations like Black North Initiative. Have we heard of Black North Initiative? In my last role, I had the CEO review the calls to action and personally commit to them, and then we adopted them as an organization. But one of the things that they did really well in their call to action was they said, it's not enough for us to see more diversity at the lower levels of your organization. So if you're a bank, for example, and you're hiring thousands of people, and you're saying, oh, we're more diverse because we brought in 50% of our new recruits were mostly Black and from other visible minorities, great. But if they're all, the drivers and the people at the reception, and they're not benefiting from higher level opportunities, then their experiences, their voices, and the economic gap that we see because of racism doesn't get closed. So in order to create meaningful change, we don't just want people at the table. We want their voices to be heard. We want them to be able to impact decision making. If I am sitting somewhere and I'm not able to influence the decisions that are being made, then me being diverse has no impact. They might say, okay, we want to have at least one diverse candidate for the top 3 that interview for any position, right? Another example is we want to make sure that we ask questions about diversity and diverse experiences and your commitment to diversity in the interview. And this actually happened in an organization that I worked with where they said, we have no budget, but we want to do work that creates a meaningful impact on gender equality. And the number one thing I did without budget was I said, every new staff person we hire, it's not just about their qualifications. I don't want the best finance person. I'd rather take the second best finance person who actually cares about the values that matter to us. So that's something to consider. So changing the criteria, asking more questions about alignment and values to make sure that they understand and they support the same values. And a third example that we talked about was working with different organizations like Pride at Work or Black North Initiative to share jobs so that there's more diverse candidates applying, right? How many people understand what the Employment Equity Act is? Okay, you should be looking this up and you should know this. How many groups are protected under the Employment Equity Act? Give me a number. Someone say 4?
4 in the chat.
4 in the chat. Great. It's actually 6.
Someone says 12.
It's actually 6. Legally, it's 4, but they've just added 2 more. So there's women, there's indigenous peoples, there's people living with disabilities, visible minorities, and recently, they've considered adding LGBTQ+ and Black as a separate group because the experience of Black people is different from everybody else. You should know this. If you're doing this work, you should know what are the groups under the Employment Equity Act, what is an employer's obligation, and how do we manage the tension between, we want diversity, but we can't bring in diverse people at the expense of them not being qualified for the job. All right. So let's move on to 2. 2, we're talking about equity. How many people know about equity? So equity, let's look at the definition. Equity recognizes that not all employees are the same. But what do we mean by equality? There's equal outcomes and equal opportunities, and those 2 things are not the same. A friend wants to invite me and my family to dinner. My mom, my dad, and myself, okay? So they invite us to dinner, and the equal outcome is what? What is the equal outcome? What are we striving for when you're inviting guests to your house for dinner? Okay, so creating connections. What else? They eat, right? We want everybody to be really full and happy that, oh my gosh, I ate well, I'm really happy. However, in my household, my mother is a Jain, she's Gujarati, which means she doesn't eat meat, she doesn't drink milk, she doesn't eat animal products. She's practically vegan. Maybe more difficult than vegan, right? But she's Jain, so everywhere we went, I had to let people know in advance that here are my mother's restrictions around food. Meanwhile, my father was a British man from Northern England, and he owned a steakhouse. So not only was it different, but it was like major contradiction because, Jains, we really value cows. and sanctity of life. And here my father was with the steakhouse. So we ate vegetarian food 6 days a week, and we went to the steakhouse 1 day a week on Wednesdays, and I got to have my pepper steak. And then my mother told me the rest of the week how bad that was for my future in heaven. So if I want an equal outcome, I must first understand, what do you eat, what do you eat, what do you eat, what do you eat, right? And so to get to that equal outcome, now I have to do what? I have to prepare different food for her, different food for my father. You know, I don't eat fish, so if we go anywhere, please don't make me fish. So that is equity, understanding the needs and then doing something about it so that you reach the equal outcome for everyone, but you've had to do business differently. I can't just cook the same meal for everyone. And there are certain groups in this country, as in other countries, that cannot exercise their rights equally or fully. That's where privilege comes in. So I'll give you an example. When I was in India, I've been to India 3 times, and one time there was a religious ceremony, and the rule was women stay at the back, men walk forward, okay? So that was just how it was, and I was being culturally appropriate, and so I stayed back, even though that's not my belief. I believe we're equal and we should walk with the men. But what was really interesting about that example was, while I was walking with the men, I was the only person with a brand new digital camera. And so the social rules was stay back, but because I had a camera, they made an exception and said, hey, you, go to the front, hang out with the men. And so it was so interesting for me to see how the same person with the same beliefs, the only thing that changed was the context. They decided that it was important to have someone with a camera at the front, and now me being a woman didn't matter. What mattered more is that I have something that they want. You have to understand the external context. What is disempowering people? What is empowering people? How can we use those factors to create more equal outcomes? And you also have to understand that time and geography changes the context. So 50 years ago, women didn't have the rights that they have today. And even with the rights that we have today, we still have issues around Me Too, for example, in the workplace. It's not over. Canada is one of the countries that has the highest rates of bullying and workplace harassment in workplaces. And if you are a woman, and if you're a person from a diverse community, if you are a marginalized minority, you're likely to experience more, degrading comments or things that make you feel bad about yourself or being passed over for a promotion. Those are all things that are happening because we don't have the ability to exercise our rights equally. Coming back to this whole idea of equal versus fair. I worked with a new CEO of a company who once said, I want everybody to start coming into work at 9 a.m. on the dot. Because everybody should have the same rule. Come in at 9 a.m., stay until 5. I don't care if you're a woman or man. I don't care if you have kids or parents or a dog that needs walking. I don't care about your dental appointments. 9 to 5 at work. Because for him, that is what being a good leader meant, and that is what being a good, efficient organization meant. But in that organization, he was also asking me, Karen, why are so many people leaving all the time? Why are they leaving? They were leaving because there was this idea of giving everybody equal treatment was actually unfair. If I had a dog and I had to let that dog out by 3 p.m., otherwise there's a mess in the house, is it fair to expect me to stay at work till 5? If I was pregnant and I wanted to take time to breastfeed my child, but you wouldn't have a fridge in the office and you wouldn't support my need to breastfeed and pump the milk, is that fair? If I was Muslim and I wanted to, take my breaks to do my prayers in the privacy of a closed room, and you don't have a space for me to do that, is that fair? No. So equity is about fairness. And the only way we can be fair to the diverse groups that we support is to understand what are their needs and what's in the way of us exercising our rights meaningfully. So unique needs might be, okay, and this actually happened with an organization that I was supporting. They wanted more people from the LGBTQ plus community to join our company. And so they said, well, of course, we will need non-binary washrooms. Because if we're going to have people from those communities, they want to know that we've thought about them, they have washrooms, right? You have the washroom, and the person joins the organization, and then it's Monday morning, and they sit down for a team meeting, and there was a hate crime in their neighborhood. It was all over the news. Maybe it happened in the States, because sometimes we talk about things in the States. And then somebody in the room made a homophobic comment. Why do they have a whole month for themselves? Why do we care about what happens to LGBTQ people in the States? Whatever the comment is. But I'm from that community. You don't know that. But I'm from the community. I'm sitting in this organization that says they care about me. and I hear this comment from maybe a senior leader, maybe a person at work that's my colleague, how do you think I feel? I don't feel safe. Now I'm questioning whether this organization really does care about people like me. You know, equity it's very nuanced, but it's very important to achieving equal outcomes, and a lot of organizations don't understand that. I worked at a bank for a year. The bank made a huge announcement that we want to include more accessibility-related quotas and efforts. We want more people with disabilities to work in our organization. They made that statement without doing the work to be ready for it. And so when I joined that bank, I sat around for 3 weeks with no computer and no work to do because they were not even ready for me. Now you add somebody who needs Zoom text or who needs a special keyboard or who can only work lying down. How long do you think it takes for them to go through the security and purchasing and all the testing of all the apps and all the new technology that you need for that one new person? I heard of people in that organization waiting 6 months with no work, no way to work, because they didn't have what they needed, because now the system had to catch up with them. So it's okay to make these kinds of commitments, but your organization needs to be ready for them. And so one of the things that helps organizations be leading organizations is they do this work ahead of time. They think about this before somebody needs it. So let's look at 3. We're 3 of 6. All right, so inclusion and belonging. How many people have ever felt included at a workspace or in your classroom? Or you know what it feels like to be included? Have you ever been in a setting where you felt excluded? Yes. It sucks, doesn't it? What are we doing to make sure that once we're here, all of us feel like we're included, we're valued, we belong, who we are matters? I feel I belong. That means that my inclusion strategy worked. So much like equity, there are things in there that make us feel like we belong. One of those aspects is safety and trust. So when I'm hired in an organization, this is such an interesting one because I worked in a tech company where the CEO really cared about these issues. You know, George Floyd had just been murdered. He really felt like we needed to make a statement and we need to say that we're fully on board. This was a white guy who had the right intentions. He wanted to do the right thing. And he wanted to be really loud and clear about his message because he knew not only his staff, but all the other men like him who are in leadership roles in companies would want to be influenced and do the same thing if he did it, right? But one of the things that happened was it very quickly became either you're in or you're not. Either you follow this commitment that we have or you get out and find another job somewhere else. That was a statement that was actually made in a meeting. Either you're on board or you ship out. And I had to go behind the scenes and say that actually I understand why you're saying that, why you're doing that, but that actually goes against what this work is about. Because DEI work is a spectrum. You can have activists who are like fully on board and they will say and do things and they will risk their own position and they will leverage their platforms and their voices because to them this is 100% what they care about most. And then there are people who are like, I just want to come to work. I don't want to hurt anyone. But I also don't want to be the one to be the voice for this work. I just want to come to work, do a good job, make good friends, and go home. So we're all in a spectrum, and we're in different places in that spectrum, and it changes over time. But I had to remind him that him making a statement like either you're on board or you're out was actually working against our view, because we should be able to run a company where you can come with different perspectives on this and still be successful at work. And one of the things that has created an issue with this work is that there are people out there leading this work that are very militant about it. And I believe that it's a journey and it takes time, and sometimes it takes many messages and many meetings like this, and maybe it takes, thinking about your personal experience, it takes many things to move people in the right direction, and that takes time. The people who were there doing amazing work but who didn't agree with the politics of the CEO, do you think they felt safe disagreeing? No. Do you think they felt like that the CEO had their back if they didn't agree with his point of view? No. And so all of a sudden I started getting messages in my calendar, can I meet with you, can I meet with you? And it was all these people saying, I don't think I belong here anymore. I don't feel like I'm safe anymore. I can't disagree anymore. Part of doing this work is creating healthy spaces where people can have dialogue and where we can agree to disagree and still be respectful and still get the work done. The other one is bias and stereotypes. So if we take sectors like nursing, what is What do we know about nursing when you think about bias and stereotypes? If I say, I was in hospital yesterday and a nurse put a needle in me, what's the image that comes to your head? It's usually a woman, right? We often think about women as nurses, but there are actually more and more male nurses. So in certain sectors, there's a bias. There's a gender bias. Tech sector, we've often said that the bias is reversed, that we have a lot of men in tech. We don't have enough women in tech. And biases are a big part of it. My parents used to tell me all the time, stop doing this activist stuff and get a real job. You think that affected how I felt about what I was doing? Of course it did. And then we're dealing with social biases in the sector, and then we're thinking about what our family thinks about us. They would be way prouder of me if I was a lawyer or a doctor. That's changed now, because I have awards and I'm a big name. But still, when we look at positions like reception, there was one organization where in the history of the entire organization, the only type of person that ever sat in reception was a woman. Gender biases in roles at work. Why couldn't we hire a man to be a receptionist? Maybe because they don't apply because of their own biases, but also when they do apply, maybe the person on the interviewing side says, you know what, I find a woman is way more welcoming and way more, nurturing of people. What is that? That's bias. We do that through conversation, through dialogue, through training, through working on our culture as an organization. And yesterday I had a meeting with somebody who's likely to be a future client, and her question to me was, I can do the policies, I can do the hiring, I can do all of this stuff. How do I get the culture piece? How do I move people and create a culture that's inclusive and safe and creates belonging for all of us? So it's not just documents, because culture is about change, and change takes time, and it takes reinforcement. And you can have all the right documents in place. It doesn't mean that your culture supports it. Celebrations are a big way. So here's the thing that all organizations are doing more of since George Floyd died, because they're trying to show, first of all, George Floyd was murdered. He didn't just die. But one of the things that we're seeing way more of is celebrations. We're going to celebrate diverse cultures. We're doing Diwali, we're doing Eid, we're doing, Passover, all of these celebrations. So now they create little committees and they tell you, you're in charge of this celebration. For June, you can bring an external speaker, or, we're going to have diverse food on this day or something, right? Those things are important. It's important to be able to share knowledge about your culture and your background with staff that maybe didn't know things about you. Like I didn't know, for example, and this came from one of my sessions where a lady said she was dating someone who was Jewish, and she went to this big reunion of people, and they were all Jewish, and they were eating pork. There was a pork dish at the table. And so she was trying to be polite and nice, and she asked somebody who had a plate full of pork, would you like a glass of milk with that? Because, of course, you're going to need a drink. How many people understand that reference, milk with pork, for Jewish people? It's a no-no. It's a no-no. Even culturally speaking, she didn't know that. Maybe if there were sessions where you learned about different cultural things, she might have known that from work, right? I didn't know that until she shared it with me. But because we understood it afterwards, so sometimes when we talk about microaggressions at work and we talk about how people don't feel like they belong, a lot of it is because I didn't know. I said something or I did something because I didn't know. So these are real experiences that we all have around belonging. And yes, we can say we shouldn't discriminate around accents, but the truth is people do, especially if you're representing their organization. And I used to often wonder, how is it that of most of the people that I met in university when I was doing my undergrad, most of the people came from international countries, ended up going back without finding employment. And I think language and accent had a lot to do with their ability to be successful or not. So we're going to talk about truth and reconciliation and indigenization very quickly, and then I'm going to land on the last one. So truth and reconciliation, how many people have read the 94 calls to action? Do you even know about the 94 calls to action? Okay, homework. Read the 94 calls to action. That is the work that Indigenous people have done to tell us what it will take to build bridges and heal and create a better future. We should know those. You should know them. And in particular, there's one around what companies need to do. If you are ever in an organization, you should be able to say, what are we doing around these 4 things that Indigenous people in Canada have asked us to do as any organization? But that's something you should look into. The other one is decolonization and indigenization, which is not the same thing as the 94 calls to action. Decolonizing thinking and ways of working. What do I mean by that? I'll give you an example. We brought in somebody from Bangladesh to work at one of the organizations that I was at. I didn't have a say in hiring that person. That person sold their home, left their job, brought their kid and their husband to this country. And then within 3 months of their trial period, we fired them. And all of the complaints that came along the way that led to that person being let go were things like, she doesn't fit in. Why? Because she didn't wear suits like everybody else. She grew up in Bangladesh where they wore, ethnic clothes. I told her she should come wearing whatever she wants to come wearing as long as she does the work right. Decolonizing means looking at the rules of what it means to be successful in an organization and questioning why. Why do we do things that way? Another great example of decolonizing, so what you wear is one thing. Another thing is around time. Because if we're looking at the loss of a loved one, sometimes it takes more than the 3 days in the policy to do the ceremonies and honor somebody who's passed away. But does our organization create flexibility that honors our cultural traditions? Or do we say, no, everybody gets 3 days? Like, how do we meet in the middle around these things? I worked with an indigenous leader for our tech company, and he taught me so much about indigenization and decolonization. And one of the things that we learned was around contracting. So for organizations, we think that the relationship begins when I sign the contract, right? I sign the contract, here are my deliverables, here are the terms, here's what you're going to pay me, and now our relationship begins. But from an indigenous perspective, the relationship begins with gift giving. It's reciprocal. I give you a gift. If I accept the gift, we're now in a relationship. That relationship is not based on money and contractual obligations. It's based on building trust. It's based on coming to my house and eating with my family. It's based on honoring who I am, which includes a long history of where I came from. 3 minutes, I want to talk about this last one because it's really important. It's called doing no harm. Good intentions are not enough. A lot of DEIB work is about doing good intentions or trying to do the right thing. And I want to say this, and I'll say it loudly. I have seen over and over and over again where organizations were trying to do the right thing and they messed up. Because social change is very complicated. You can try and do something over here and create a problem over here. And a great example of that was when our company wanted to be inclusive of LGBTQI people. And they said, okay, we're going to make it a policy that everybody should have their pronouns on their Zoom and on their email signature. But because I know better, I actually sent a message out to the entire organization and I said, if we want to do this for these reasons, what should we consider? And everybody said, this is overdue, it's a great idea, we should do this. The only person who said it's not a good idea was a member of the community. And the reason why it wasn't a good idea for them was because they weren't ready to come out, which would mean they'd have to either lie, which is re-traumatizing them, or they would have to come out before they're ready, which is also traumatizing them. So they said, I know where you're coming from, I know you have good intentions, but this policy is going to hurt me and people like me. So we have to slow down enough to ask questions like this because I don't know everybody's life experience, but I know if I slow down enough, I can ask questions and I can get information that will help me make decisions that are better for all of us. So, in summary, this is the Conscious Equality Framework. As you can tell, there's a lot that I didn't share because of time, but this is a really important piece to what I do and how I do it. And the reason why I created this was because I feel like organizations doing this work don't have a master roadmap. They all have bits and pieces, they do online certificates, they do this and that over here, but they don't understand. In order for us to move together forward in a way that's truly meaningful and sustainable, you need a roadmap. And this is the roadmap that I teach and I share. The last thing I'll say is you have my connection, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, you can share your questions with me. I would love to hear from you. Did you learn something? Do you have more questions? Did this impact you in some way on a personal level? It's really important to me to hear that. So because we haven't had a lot of dialogue and most of you are online, I really want to hear from you. So connect with me. And if it asks you, what is my email address? You can put it in, karen.craggs@gmail.com, or you can just follow me and I will connect with you if you just follow. But thank you for the time to be with you today. This is a really important conversation and I hope you take it in any field that you go in and any work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you.